brand new to the fishing game, you're trying to figure out what equipment you're going to need to get started. You walk into the Bass Pro Shop, you think you're ready to buy some stuff. You look down the rod aisle, going, all right, what am I going to get? And it dawns on you that there's hundreds of choices. All of a sudden, you're feeling overwhelmed. You don't know what to do. Today, I'm going to help you out with that. Welcome, scoundrels. Got my Star Wars shirt on today because it's Star Wars Day, and I like Star Wars, which is where the scoundrels thing comes from.
Scoundrel?
In case anybody has been curious about that. Never really made it clear. Anyways, like the title of the video suggests, well, it doesn't suggest, I'm not into that. It's telling you, I'm going to help you figure out how to pick out a rod and reel. And, that comes down to the brand new fisherman, which is really who this video is kind of geared towards. But even if you're not new, even if you've been doing this for a while and you just want to get your game a little bit better, or maybe even understand a little bit more what the pros are talking about in their videos when they're talking about the equipment that they're using when they're landing fish all the time, that information's in here also. It all kind of filters out to where it needs to go. I guess I'll get that. Whether you're the new angler, got a little bit of experience under your belt and looking to increase your game, or even if you just want to understand a little bit better what the pros are talking about with their equipment, all that information is going to be in this video. So we're going to do a few things. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. We're going to talk about the rod and the different mechanical properties of that. We're going to talk about reel and its mechanical properties. And then I'm going to give some real basic guidelines, especially, like I said, for the beginner fisherman. If you want to know what that is, we'll try to put a timestamp down there where that information is if you just want to cut through all the crap and get to that. But over the last few years, I've been getting back into fishing, and this year I really kicked it up a notch, partially because of this channel that I'm starting here. Additionally, because I just want to be better. I'm tired of relying on luck and all the other mumbo jumbo that people go with. So I've been doing a lot more research, and well, here we are. So let's rewind quite a few years to my childhood, where most of my fishing excursions were with my grandfather and occasionally my uncle, or just general family gatherings at the lake. And we'd go out and we'd throw a line in the water with a weight and some snelled hooks and set them in a rod holder, put a bell on it, and just wait. And that was great. It's fun, spending time with family, running around, doing whatever kids did at that time. I don't know. This is like the 80s and 90s. But I didn't learn a whole lot there. I have absolutely no idea what equipment my grandfather was handing me or what he was buying me when he did buy me stuff. I got a little bit of novelty stuff. I got some decent equipment, maybe some hand-me-down stuff from him when he would buy a new rod. All kinds of different stuff. He was giving me rods and reels all the time. I think a lot of them were pre-made combos, preset combos, something. But that was that fishing experience, and like I said, I didn't really learn a whole lot from it. Fast forward, but not all the way up to current day. I decided I wanted to get into fishing again to try to put food on the table. So it seems like a relatively cheap way to do it. It can get very expensive very quickly. Yeah. But overall, the long run, if you're taking care of stuff or, you know, if you're just interested in putting food on the table, there's nothing wrong with throwing a line out and just waiting. Eventually you will catch stuff. I don't, my patience isn't geared like that anymore. I like active fishing. It's a lot more entertaining for me, and when the bite does happen, it's a lot more exciting. So I watched some YouTube videos. The pros are suggesting stuff, and I didn't really think anything about what the right rod and reel was. Fishing pole is a fishing pole. And, you know, I knew I didn't want a spin caster. And so, you know, I went and picked out a spinning rod combo. And then, you know, fished for a few years, started getting a little bit better, tried applying some techniques. I bought some bait casting reels. I just, again, wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. I was listening to what they were saying, but it didn't mean anything. Which is one of the problems. Well, not necessarily a problem, but it's something that I've noticed with a lot of the guys who've been doing this their whole life and were raised with this information and know what they're looking for, is that they don't have the newer perspective per se. So a lot of the proper explanation gets left out. So I'm going to try to fill that void. Maybe I just haven't watched the right videos. Who knows? But I did do some reading. I can do that. I promise. Just takes a little while. But I did do a lot of reading online. And I did write my own blog post to go along with this. It's quite a bit longer. Gets into a little bit better detail. Maybe a little bit more entertaining because I had time to actually think about stuff. But I do have the links to some of those articles too in that. But read mine first, then go read those guys, because there's some information that I didn't really quite get into. Because I didn't think it was necessary for what I was trying to say, but it's still very helpful. Anyways, so that brings us to where we are now. Doing research, and I've got a little bit better grasp on what I'm doing. So, anyways, I happen to have a combo right here. This is a half brand new combo. This is my Lose Xfinity Speed Stick. Sounds like a deodorant. That I just picked up at Walmart because I needed another medium rod for some of the fishing. And I wanted something a little bit longer because I just didn't feel like I was getting the distance that I wanted, which is where length really comes in the most important. The longer the rod, the more material there is to build up energy to help you cast a little bit further. It's not a guarantee that you're always going to get faster. There's 1,000 different variables that go into this, and 1,000 different techniques. Well, maybe not 1,000, but there's a lot of different techniques that all come together. They culminate into this one moment where you get the perfect cast, and hopefully there's a fish there. The other thing about length is that sometimes you're in an area, especially if you're a bank fisher, like I generally am. That's why I go a little bit longer. And most of my fishing spots around here there's not a lot of trees where I live. And it's sad and depressing sometimes. But when I'm trying to fish, it's kind of great because I don't have to worry about getting hung up as much. Now, if you're in an area like, I don't know, Ohio, just because I know that area, where there might be a lot more trees, you might want a little bit shorter rod just so that we don't have to worry as much about it. But you are going to sacrifice just a little bit on your distance casting. But if you've done your research and watched my future videos, and just, got all the right knowledge, that shouldn't make very much difference. Anyways, so after length, which on its importance. The other two factors that really matter on a rod are your power and your action. And both of those affect what kind of line or not what kind, but how strong of a line you're going to use, which is your pound test, and how heavy of a lure you can use. And they kind of go hand in hand. I think one might impart a little bit more influence than the other, vice versa. I don't know. I do. We'll talk about it. So anyways, let's talk about power real quick. Power is the rod's measurement of how it handles force applied to it. That being either the lure that you're throwing or a bite. Sometimes a snag too, because those are gonna happen and you have to deal with it. But mostly it's that fish swims by, sees your bait, slams it, and then your rod starts to bend. If you have a rod that's too weak, like say an ultralight on the one extreme end, you could risk breaking your rod if you're not set up right and you're not prepared for it. On the other hand, if it's too heavy, like say an extra heavy, and you might do some damage to the fish and you're still not going to land it. With the extra heavy, you stand a little bit less of a risk doing damage to your rod, but you are going to potentially do damage to the fish, and if you have the wrong line on there, you're going to break your line off and still lose the fish. So anyways, your different classifications for a rod start with the ultralight, like I said. Then the next up is a light, a medium light, medium heavy, heavy, and extra heavy. What should you focus on? I'm not going to tell you right now. You'll have to watch the end of the video or jump ahead for that. But each power rating has its specific purpose and its specific technique, especially when you get into bass fishing, which is where most of the attention is given now, because that's what a lot of tournaments and stuff revolve around, is landing those big bass and getting a lot of weight, or however that particular tournament's running. I don't know offhand. Not interested in tournaments at the moment. I have to learn how to catch fish first. So yeah, that's pretty much power in a nutshell. So let's move on then to action, which is the other thing I said was important in a rod. And that's the measure of how much flexibility a rod has, essentially. And it's usually figured by where in the rod it bends. So let's see if I can get this to fit here a little bit. So most of your bending action is going to happen in this part of the rod, from wherever your eyelets start, maybe a little bit lower, but around your bottom eyelet all the way to the tip. Now, this might make sense after I explain it, but I'm sure a lot of people don't really think about it until it's time to think about it. The slower your action, the further down the rod it bends. So this is going to be your slow, is going to bend down here somewhere after the halfway mark of the rod length, down to your bottom eyelet. Your moderate action is going to bend more towards the middle here. These 4 eyelet section on this one. And then your faster ones are going to bend towards the tip. Let's go ahead and get this information out of the way before I forget it. Your categories for action are extra fast, fast, moderate, and slow. So, I almost forgot to talk about this. When you're looking at your action on here, a lot of times it's not listed, so it's going to be kind of difficult to tell if you're getting the right thing. I'm going to show you real quick how you can test that. Oh, let me get up and be old. So, if you take your rod got your, oh, it's not going to focus on it. But you can see I got my eyes up. If you take it and put the tip down somewhere, let me get in frame, and push it down on the ground, it'll enact that parabolic action. I used a big word, I didn't use it earlier. And you can see where it's bending at. So this is a fast action rod, and you can see that it was bending more towards the tip. If it were a moderate action, it would bend closer to the middle, and so on. Kind of like I talked about a moment ago. But now you know how to do it yourself. But the action really imparts two mechanics on the rod. The beginning part of it is as you're casting a lure, and the end side is setting the hook. But let's talk about that former. So we're going to use the analogy of tossing a ball. And I want you to take your arm and kind of just flick your wrist. If you want, grab a ball, whatever. But I think we all know that if you just use your wrist to flick a ball, it's not going to go nearly as far as if you're using your whole arm, incorporating from, like, starting at the shoulder. And how that applies to a lure is you're building up more energy on, let's back up a second, break that down. So like your wrist would be a faster action, your elbow would be a moderate action, and your shoulder would be a slower action, because it takes more effort for that to happen. But as you bring your rod back, whichever way you're doing it, however you're doing it, because there's several ways to cast a lure, the slower the action, the more energy it's able to build up and fling that lure farther. You usually find your slower actions in especially lighter rods, but rods that are intended to throw a little bit lighter weight. So that's why you might see different lure weights listed on a rod, on the same power of a rod. So like a medium, for example, might be a 1/4 ounce, or no, I'm going to go a little bit lower. So like maybe a 1/16 ounce, for example, to a 1/2 ounce. And then another one might be, like this one is an 1/8 ounce to 3/8 of an ounce. It's just, those different weight ranges are affected by the power a little bit, but mostly by the rod's ability to throw the lure. Yeah. So, again, the slower the rod, the more energy it's able to build up and throw the lure. And the faster it is, it's not able to build up as much. So it's generally when you see the heavier weights, because you need that extra weight to help the rod build up that energy to throw the lure. So, let's get to the back end of that. You've cast your lure, you're retrieving it. Can't really do that because I'm in the house and everything's all hooked up here. But fish comes along, he bites. It's time to set the hook. You've got a fast action rod and you've got a light hook on there. What's going to happen? Well, you might think you're doing the right thing, but because all the action is happening here, it's applying too much power to the hook set, and you're going to do one of two things: rip the hook right through the fish's mouth, or straighten your hook out. Either way, you've lost the fish. So, what's happened there? Let's go to another analogy. Let's use a string, and it's just kind of laying on the ground. So, again, using your arm as kind of the blank for the rod. Wrist is your fast action, elbow medium, shoulder slow, moderate, elbows moderate. Use the right terminology here, guy. So you've got a string laying on the ground and you just pull it with your wrist. It's going to impart a quick amount of force. Is that how I want to say that? It's going to apply the force quickly to the string, and it's going to actually create a whipping action. Whereas if you pull using your whole arm from your elbow or from your shoulder, um, it's imparting a slow, or the energy is being applied a lot slower, so the line's able to stay straighter and it's not going to whip around as much, if that makes sense. So that's what's going on with the lure, is that faster action is creating kind of a whip action. And again, if you're using the wrong hook, if you've got a light wire hook, it's going to not most likely, but it's going to do one of those two things. It's going to rip right through the fish's mouth, causing damage to the fish, which we want to try to avoid, and it's going to straighten the hook out. Either way, you've lost that fish. And in the process of straightening out, it might also rip the fish's mouth a little bit. So you've lost the fish, and if the hook's straightened out, you've lost the lure too. And as some of us might know, even some of these jig heads, they're kind of expensive, or they can get costly pretty quickly. So we want to try to do that. We want to be as successful as possible and keep our equipment for as long as possible, right? So that's essentially your action. You've got your reel. It's got three main components to it. The drag, which is often overlooked or neglected, or maybe just people just don't understand it properly. You've got your bearing rating and your gear ratio. I suppose you do also have your spool size, but that only matters mostly in how much line you can put on there. A little bit in casting, especially when you start getting down a little bit more. And it does affect the weight because a smaller one weighs less. Yeah. Material matters too, but let's backtrack a little bit because I want to make something a little bit clear. I'm mostly going to be showing a spinning reel here, but a lot of this information is pertinent to your bait casters also. So just because I have a spinning reel doesn't mean that this information doesn't apply to you if you buy a bait caster. It still matters. They just work a little bit differently. So let's start off with drag, because that's what I said first, and I said things in the right order this time. Like I said, mentioning it, your drag, I think, is oftentimes overlooked, and I think a big part of that is because people just don't really understand its purpose. Mainly it's there to keep you from breaking stuff. It allows larger, stronger fish to fight a little bit, tire themselves out without exerting an unnecessary amount of force on your line. So what's happening there is it's allowing line to feed out because the fish is pulling on it without it spinning too fast. Because if it spins too fast, you run the chance of burning your reel out. On the other hand, if you have it tightened down too much and it's not allowing line out at all, you run the risk of breaking your line. So the extreme ends of that are bad. Now, from everything that I've read and watched and blah, 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 most people, well, almost everybody suggests that you should set your drag rating at 20 to 30% of your test weight on your line. So for this combo, I've got 20-pound test on here. So I'd be setting this at about 4 to 6 pounds. I'm trying to shoot for somewhere in between the two, just so that way I've got a little bit of play if I need it. But that's important because, like, let's take this one, for example, specifically. This reel has a drag rating of 22 pounds. So I'm actually down towards the bottom end of that, which allows this reel to spin fairly freely. So I will be getting another rod at some point this year, maybe, when one of my other rods breaks. That's the rule I've set for myself. Tell my wife. Because it's going to be a lot heavier rod, so I'll be able to put heavier line on it. But it just 22 pounds seems a little excessive, and if I'd have known a little bit more when I bought it, I would have paid a lot more attention to that. Now, I've got some other ones that have a lot lighter drag, so it's a lot easier to get it where I need it, and the rod or the reel to function the way I want it to. But yeah, that's your drag. It is kind of important, because I know a lot of times people, the fish will start pulling on it, and the instinct is to tighten that down so that way they can't, but you actually want the fish to be able to pull that. Like I said, it allows a bigger, more aggressive fish to tire itself out, so you don't break your line, you don't do damage to the fish, or harm, supposed to be more appropriate, and you're not going to lose the lure, because it's bad enough to lose a lure, it's bad enough to cause harm to a fish, it's worse to lose a lure and cause harm to the fish at the same time, because you lost them both at the same time. Makes it harder for that fish to eat and everything, 'cause it's already got stuff in its face. So that's bad, for the sportmen out there, or the sports peoples, I guess, who are catch and release mostly. You really want to pay attention to that. If you're trying to feed people like I am, you still need to land the fish. So the next part of the reel that kind of matters, but I don't think it matters quite as much as people think it does. It's one of those kind of gimmicky things that you put a big number on and people go, ooh, must be better. Not always the case. So again, using my Daiwa here as an example, this is a moderately priced reel. I think I paid like $60 or $70 for it. But it's somewhere in that range, so it's not super duper awesome, but it's not super terrible, I don't think. Time will tell. Better not be. I paid $70 for it. But this has a 9 plus 1, 10. Yeah, it's a 9 plus 1 bearing system. So that means that this has bearings all over the place, which, when you think back to my drag example, might be part of the reason why it spins a lot freer too. But it's gonna have bearings in your handle and here, maybe under the spool. I don't know. I haven't torn it apart yet. I want to tear some of my other easier ones apart before I start getting in too deep into it. But that's that big number that people see, and 10's kind of on the high end for now. I think I've seen some that have gotten up into like 13, but more bearings does not necessarily equal better. A lot of times it could actually mean worse, because if they put a lot of money into some of the other materials, like the casing and the spool and stuff like that, they're going to take that money out of the bearing end. So they've enticed you to buy this reel with a high bearing count, but if they're crappy bearings, it's going to break a lot easier, and you're going to have to replace them, or just replace the reel, because that's what most people would do. So time will tell how decent this is. Some of the stuff that I've looked into suggests that, like, especially, I think Daiwa was one of the ones that they talked about, where they'll put really good bearings in the spots where it matters. I'm still learning some of those parts, and they'll put the lower quality bearings in the parts where it's less impactful. So hopefully that's the case with this one. I think I am going to need to do a cleaning on it soon, because it's been kind of making some sounds and I've been making bad decisions with it. Bad me. But yeah, that's your bearings in a nutshell. There's not really a recommendation there, I don't think. I've got my Shimano that's got 3 bearings, and so far it's pretty fine. It's brand new, so I've still got to play with it a little bit. I do think I need to clean it and grease it up a little bit better. As I was talking about my combo, or maybe, I don't know, I've tried to record this a few times, because this is a new format for me and it's hard. But it's only got one bearing, and honestly, it's kind of amazing, especially once I cleaned it and got it working properly again. So, yeah, just remember with bearings, more doesn't always mean better, and pay attention to price. Like if it's got a lower bearing count, theoretically, if you're paying a decent price and it's got a low bearing count, it should have some decent bearings in it. Anyways, I think I've said enough about bearings. Didn't know there was that much to talk about. What was the last thing? What was the last thing? Oh my god, I've actually forgotten the last thing. Drag, bearing, gear ratio. Oh, man. So, the last function on a reel is your gear ratio. And your gear ratio is probably the most important part. It is the numbers that, I would say that and drag are the two numbers that you need to pay the most attention to. Especially this, because it's going to affect how your lures work in the water and how effective they are at doing what they're supposed to do. So you've got pretty much three categories. You've got slow, medium, and fast, I think. Something like that. It's all very similar. And then I'd say it's probably safe to say there's an extra fast category in there too. Your slow retrieve, your slower gear ratios are going to be on the lower end. The smaller the number, the slower it's going to work. Because your gear ratio is a measure of how many turns your spool, your spinner, or the spool, if you're using a bait caster, how many rotations it makes per turn of the handle. So, like on the low end, my Fluger is a 5.2, for example. So for every 180 degree turn of my handle, the spinner is going to spin 5.2 times. And so then naturally, the faster that it is, the more times that's spinning. Just so that way you know what I'm talking about now. Anyway, so your slower ones are going to be generally in that 5-to-1 gear ratio spectrum. So most of them go like 5.1-to-1 all the way up to, I think you could go into the low sixes a little bit, but your sixes are generally your medium speeds. And then your 7-to-1s are going to be your faster. Well, 7 on up. There's some of them that get into 9 or faster. But those are very specific use. So, and that's just a very general, I don't remember the numbers offhand, but like compressed it. And most of your numbers are going to fit into that grouping, like I said. So I don't want to get too deep into that. I've got a chart that breaks down which speed is best for which kind of baits. I want to start this part off by saying there's nothing wrong with going and buying a pre-selected, that's the word I was thinking of for before, combo. So that would be a combo that comes with a rod and a reel all in one package. So yeah, don't think of yourself less of a person for buying one of those. They're perfectly fine, especially if you're new and you're just getting into the hobby and you don't want to invest a whole lot because you're not sure if you're actually going to enjoy it as much as you imagine you will. I know there's days, especially for me right now, forcing myself to learn techniques and apply different techniques, that it's a real struggle and it gets frustrating at times. But there's other things that I enjoy with being outdoors doing stuff than just catching things, hunting, whatever. Um, so yeah, you can start there. A lot of them are going to be in the medium range with moderate gear ratio reel and a moderate action. That's been my experience looking at them and playing with them a little bit. Which, oh, don't say it. But if you're interested in putting together your own combo, I would suggest, first off, spending a little bit more money on your reel than your rod. Just because I think of it kind of like a car. Your reel is your engine and your rod is the body. And while the body does affect the physics of the car, the engine's a lot more important. That's just my own personal opinion and perspective on it. Maybe you want a good balance in there, but personally I'd put a little bit more money in the reel just because it's a piece that's definitely going to last you a lot longer, or it can with the proper maintenance. I don't know why I keep pointing over there because I have rods leaning up against the wall over there. But I would definitely recommend something as far as your rod goes in the medium range of power, medium light, medium or medium heavy, somewhere in there. Kind of depends on what you're doing, but you'll be able to focus on a lot of techniques that way. And I would go for a moderate action just because, again, it gives you the most versatility. Is it going to be the best for some techniques? No, but it will still work for you. If you're getting into some of the other techniques that require some of the other stuff, or you're targeting other fish, obviously go for that. That would be a little bit more for the experienced or a specific user. But yeah, moderate or a medium power rod with moderate action will give you some pretty good versatility. Again, you can go to the medium light or the medium heavy end. You'll be able to pretty much fish whatever. Yeah. And then your reel, I would stick in the moderate speed, somewhere in the 6.2 to maybe 7:1 to 1 gear ratio. Because that's a lot easier for you to personally manipulate. If you need to go a little bit slower, you can control that with your, by just reeling slower. If you need to go faster, you can reel a lot faster. But if you get a fast one, again, we're going for versatility here. So if you get a fast one, it's going to impart too much action. Or if you have to slow down, you have to slow way, way down. And it's hard to maintain that level without doing it too much. And on the opposite end, if you've got, and you can only go so slow, but on the opposite end, if you've got too slow of a retrieve, it's hard to get to the right speed for some things. Like I've learned with my Fluger, again, that's a 5.2 to 1. It's just not real good for a lot of inline spinners. I like to keep that in the moderate to a little bit faster range. So that's my recommendation for that. Break that simple one more time. Medium range power rod with moderate action and moderate speed reel. So something in the 6 to low 7 range. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else that I really needed to say about it. If I do, you know where you can find it. That link's down below. Also down below, check out our Instagram, Facebook page. I'm a little bit more active on the Instagram, so I'd prefer you go there because that one's easier to do. And yeah, if I missed anything, let me know. I'm going to keep doing some of these. While working on this one, had to take a break and thought about talking about terminal tackle. Maybe. I don't know. But the next thing I'm definitely working on in this more educational type series is the Ned rig. I just bought a bunch of stuff off Tackle Warehouse. I don't know when I'm going to get it because C19 has screwed everything up. But stay tuned for that. I do have some other stuff that's going to go up. Like I'm going to talk about all my combos that I have and get into a little bit more detail with that. So come back for that. Like, subscribe. Tell me what you think of this, please. You know, I'm getting started. I need some feedback for what people are liking, what they're not liking, so that way I can develop myself a little bit better for this. And obviously, the more I do it, the better I'll get. So, toodles.